As I got through much of the media analysis today and listened to the press conferences and the speeches and then flicked around the other news sources as much as I could, I did it all to get a sense of where things sit tonight. One thing for certain, while the usual suspects are trying to make excuses for the mess in Victoria, it's clear Victorians aren't buying the excuses, and they know that much of the blame for the secondary outbreak sits squarely on the desk of the Premier, Labor's Daniel Andrews. Like it or not, the buck stops with the leader. Famously, a sign sat on US President Harry Truman's desk in the Oval Office saying just that. The buck stops here, said the sign, and leaders that forget it at their peril. The PM might have tried to say last week that this outbreak in Victoria could have happened anywhere, but no one who does their homework believes that. And nor should the PM, national unity or not, the PM should not try and obscure the reality of what we're learning about this second COVID wave in Victoria. It's not a spike. It's now well and truly a second wave outbreak that's close to spiralling out of control in Victoria and is now seeping into southwestern Sydney. It seems to have originated in Victoria's incompetently run quarantine system and spread via the tacitly encouraged Black Lives Matter protest in Melbourne in early June. Based on published reports, this is what we know. By June 6, 14 corona cases had been linked to the Ridges Hotel quarantine failure. Also on June 6, at least 10,000 people attended the Black Lives Matter protest in Melbourne, and none, other than the three organisers, were fined for breaching quarantine rules. Within 12 days, at least 3 protesters had tested positive, including one working at a Northland store. A week on, the Northland store cluster was renamed the North Melbourne Family Cluster. And by June 2, that cluster had spread to the subsequently locked down public housing towers, now reporting so far 242 coronavirus cases. As Victoria's Chief Health Officer conceded this week, it's entirely conceivable that the entire Victorian second wave has spread from just one quarantine hotel. Worse still, time and time again, the Victorian government rejected offers of military help, and again confirmation last week that the tracing teams in Victoria operated outside the national guidelines. Add in turf wars between ministers, claims the police didn't want to do the quarantine work, and all in all, this is about as bad as I've ever seen it get on the scale of government incompetence. And it's now that incompetence that's putting the entire country at risk. With 105 people in hospital tonight in Victoria, a number of them in their 40s and 50s, the majority in their 60s, one man even in his 30s, this is serious. A private company, as my guest said earlier today, he's on the show tonight, this is the guy that runs the abattoirs, as a private company, mismanagement like this would mean industrial manslaughter charges. But the worst that can happen to Daniel Andrews is that he gets voted out, and even that can't happen for 2 more years. Meanwhile, there's sickness and death for some, economic pain for everybody, and for the elderly who are most at risk until the arrival of what may never eventuate, this vaccine, there's no light at the end of the tunnel for them. For several months, Australia had the coronavirus almost completely locked up in hotel quarantine until the most arrogant and incompetent government in the country let it out again. Forget those trying to make excuses for the Premier, because let me tell you, there's far too many Victorian voters waiting with their baseball bats on polling day to save Daniel Andrews now.